She has always been nothing. Sign the papers and let her go back to whatever worthless life she crawled out of. Grant Callahan said those words out loud, in front of his mother, his sister, his girlfriend, his attorney. He said them while looking directly at his wife of 5 years, and then he slid the divorce papers across the table with one finger, the way you slide a tip to someone you barely respect. Evelyn did not cry. She did not argue. She picked up the pen with a steady hand and signed her name slowly, deliberately, like a woman who already knew something nobody else in that room was going to understand for a very long time. They thought they were erasing her. They had absolutely no idea who they were letting go. If you're new here, please subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The conference room on the 14th floor of Callahan Realty smelled like fresh coffee and expensive cologne, and every single person sitting around that long oak table had been invited specifically to watch Evelyn Whitmore lose. That was the thing nobody said out loud, but everybody understood. Grant had arranged the signing the way some men arrange a performance. He had called his mother Diana Callahan, who arrived wearing a cream blazer, and the particular expression she reserved for occasions she considered victories. He had called his sister Pamela, who sat beside their mother with her arms folded and her chin slightly raised, the way people sit when they have already decided the outcome of something. And he had invited Chelsea Farrow, his girlfriend of 7 months, the woman he had been seeing while still technically married to Evelyn, to sit directly across the table from his wife, because Grant Callahan had always believed that the best way to end something was to make the ending as public and as final as possible. Evelyn arrived alone. She wore a gray sweater, dark slacks, and low flat shoes. Her hair was pulled back simply. She carried a small canvas bag over one shoulder, the kind that looked like it had been used and washed many times. She did not look like someone preparing for war. She looked like someone who had already finished one. She sat down at the end of the table. Diana Callahan looked at her the way you look at furniture you're about to replace. Pamela glanced at Chelsea and then back at Evelyn with a thin smile that said everything without saying anything. Chelsea, for her part, was wearing a silk blouse the color of champagne and a diamond pendant that Evelyn recognized immediately because she had seen it once in a jewelry catalog that Grant had left open on his desk back in the early days of the marriage, when she still believed he was searching for things to give to her. Grant came in last. He was wearing a suit, a good one. He had gotten a haircut recently, and he looked rested in the way that men look rested when they have made a decision that relieves them of guilt. He sat at the head of the table, set a folder in front of him, and barely glanced at Evelyn before he said, "The attorneys have already reviewed everything. This should be straightforward." Straightforward. Evelyn almost smiled at that word. 5 years. 5 years of cooking dinner while Grant worked late. 5 years of learning the names of his clients so she could ask about them at parties and make him look attentive. 5 years of adjusting her own schedule, her own habits, her own small ambitions to fit inside the shape of the life Grant was trying to build. 5 years of listening to his mother imply in 100 different polished ways that Evelyn was not quite right for him, not successful enough, not ambitious enough, not the kind of woman who could stand beside a man like Grant Callahan and make him look better. Straightforward. "I've reviewed the terms," Evelyn said quietly. Her voice was steady and clear. "I don't have any questions." Diana Callahan made a small sound that was not quite a laugh, but was not anything else either. She leaned slightly toward Pamela and murmured something, and Pamela pressed her lips together to hold back whatever expression was trying to get out. Grant slid the papers down the table toward Evelyn. He did it without standing, without walking over to her, without the basic courtesy of crossing 6 feet of conference room to hand, something to the woman he had spent 5 years married to. He just slid the folder down the table like she was a colleague he barely knew. Evelyn reached out and stopped it with one hand. She opened the folder. She read through it slowly and carefully because she was someone who had always believed that documents deserved to be read fully before they were signed, regardless of how much other people in the room wanted to get on with their lives. Chelsea shifted in her chair. Pamela checked her phone. Diana refilled her coffee from the carafe on the side table, making enough noise with the cup and saucer to let everyone know she found the wait unnecessary. Grant said, "Evelyn, it's done. We've both read it. There's nothing in there that wasn't already agreed to." "I know," Evelyn said. She did not look up. She kept reading. And in that silence, in those 60 or 70 seconds when nobody spoke, and the only sound was the faint rustle of paper, Evelyn thought about the conversation she had had with her younger brother Nathan 2 weeks earlier. She had called him from the parking lot of the grocery store where she worked part-time, sitting in her car with the engine off and the windows fogging slowly in the December cold. "They want to do it at the office," she had told him. "Grant wants everyone there." Nathan had been quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He wants an audience." "Yes." "He wants you to feel small." "Yes." Another pause. Then Nathan said, "Evie, you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to walk in there without anyone." "I know," she said. "Then let me come." "No." She said it gently, but without any room in it. "I want to do this alone. I want to sit in that room with all of them watching, and I want to sign those papers quietly. And then I want to walk out." "Why?" She had looked out through the foggy windshield at the parking lot at the ordinary world of shopping carts and headlights and people carrying grocery bags to their cars, and she said, "Because I want to remember exactly how this felt, every second of it, so that I never forget what I almost let myself become." Nathan had not said anything else after that. He understood Evelyn in the way that younger siblings sometimes understand older ones, not completely but deeply, in the places that matter most. Now she set the pen on the paper. Grant sat forward slightly. Diana Callahan put her coffee cup down. Even Chelsea seemed to hold her breath for a moment, as if she needed the signature to feel real, before she could fully settle into the life she was preparing to step into. Evelyn signed her name. She did it slowly and deliberately, the way she did everything. Her handwriting was clear and even, and when she finished, she capped the pen and placed it on top of the folder and slid it back down the table toward Grant. He caught it. He looked at her signature, then at her. And for just a moment, just the briefest, thinnest moment, something moved behind his eyes. Something that might have been uncertainty or recognition or the very beginning of a question he wasn't prepared to ask yet. Then Diana Callahan clapped her hands together lightly and said, "Well, that's done then." And Pamela said, "Finally." And Chelsea smiled. And Grant closed the folder. Evelyn stood up, picked up her canvas bag, and walked to the door. She did not say goodbye. She did not shake anyone's hand. She did not look back at Grant or at his mother or at the woman in the champagne-colored blouse who was already reaching across the table to touch Grant's arm. She just walked out. And as the elevator doors closed behind her, Evelyn Whitmore leaned against the back wall, tilted her head up toward the fluorescent ceiling, and breathed. She was not heartbroken. She was free. But she was also something else, something quieter and more complicated, something she could not have explained to anyone in that conference room, even if she had tried. Because the truth, the real truth about Evelyn, the truth that Grant Callahan had spent 5 years sleeping beside without ever once trying to discover, was sitting inside her, like a door she had kept closed for a very long time. And she could feel it now in this silence, in this particular kind of ending beginning very slowly to open. She just wasn't ready yet to walk through it. Not today. Today was for signing papers and riding elevators and going back to the small apartment on Fernwood Street where she had been living for the past 3 months since she moved out of the house she and Grant had shared. Today was for making tea and sitting by the window and allowing herself to feel whatever she actually felt, which was something she had learned over the years was rarer and braver than it sounded. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The elevator didn't work half the time. The radiator knocked in the middle of the night. The kitchen window looked out onto the brick wall of the building next door, and if you pressed your face to the glass and looked sideways, you could see a sliver of sky the width of a notebook page. Evelyn loved it. She knew that sounded strange. She knew that anyone who looked at her life from the outside would see a woman in her early 30s who had just ended her marriage, who was working part-time at a grocery store and picking up occasional shifts at a small community center nearby, who lived in an apartment where the heat was unreliable and the walls were thin, and the neighbors sometimes argued loudly enough that she could hear the specific words. But that was the outside. The inside was something else entirely. Evelyn had chosen this life deliberately. She had chosen it years before she ever met Grant Callahan, years before she walked into the catering company where Grant was attending a client dinner, and he had looked at her across the room and decided she was interesting. She had chosen it at 23 when she sat across a desk from her father in the top-floor office of Whitmore Holdings and told him she needed to leave. Alexander Whitmore had been 56 at the time. He was a large man in every sense of the word, tall, broad, with a voice that carried across rooms without effort, and a reputation that carried across industries with similar ease. He had built his company from the kind of determination that people describe in admiration and sometimes in fear, because determination at that scale does not always distinguish between obstacles and people. He had looked at his daughter for a long time before he spoke. "You want to leave," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Why?" Evelyn had thought about how to say it for weeks. She had practiced the words in her apartment at night in the dark until she knew them well enough to say them calmly in the daylight. "Because I need to know who I am without this," she said. "The name, the money, the position, all of it. I need to know if I'm actually someone worth knowing, or if everyone who talks to me is just talking to what I represent." Alexander had been quiet for a long time. "You think people only see the name," he said. "I think I can't tell anymore," she said. "I think I haven't been able to tell for a long time, and I need to fix that." Her father looked out the window for a while. When he turned back, his expression was not what she expected. She had prepared herself for argument, for persuasion, even for anger. What she saw instead was something that looked surprisingly like understanding. "You know what you're walking away from," he said. "Yes. The inheritance, the position, the board seat that will be yours when I retire." "Yes. And you're walking away from all of it voluntarily, to go work what ordinary jobs, to live how, quietly," Evelyn said, "just quietly." Alexander Whitmore had studied his daughter for another long moment, and then he said something that she had carried with her ever since, through every small apartment and every modest paycheck and every moment when the life she had chosen felt difficult in the way that deliberately chosen difficulties do. He said, "I'm going to trust you. I'm going to let you go. But I want you to understand something, Evelyn. Whatever you discover out there, whatever you learn about who you are when the name isn't in the room, I want you to bring it back. Because this company, this family needs what you're going to become. Not what you are right now, what you're going to become." She had left the next week. She changed her last name on everything that wasn't a legal document. She moved to a different city. She found jobs that required her hands and her presence and her patience. She cashiered at grocery stores. She assisted at community health clinics. She drove for a meal delivery service for seniors and spent an unexpected year learning that the most interesting people she had ever met in her life were the ones who opened doors to her wearing house slippers and offered her coffee before she could even get their containers unloaded. She built a life that was genuinely hers, and she was good at it, not in the way that people with privilege are sometimes good at slumming, playing at simplicity, and then retreating when it gets hard, but actually authentically good at it. Her coworkers liked her. Her neighbors trusted her. The elderly woman on the second floor of her building on Maple Street, before the Fernwood apartment, used to leave containers of soup outside Evelyn's door, and Evelyn used to leave notes in return. Small, careful, handwritten notes that were not thank you notes exactly, but more like dispatches from a person who was paying attention to the world. She met Grant in year 3 of her self-imposed exile, as she had come privately to think of it. He was charming and confident, and he looked at her like she was worth looking at, which mattered to her more than she admitted. She had been lonely in the specific way that comes not from being alone, but from being unknown, from having a whole interior country that nobody had mapped. Grant seemed like someone who wanted to explore it. He wasn't. She learned that slowly, not all at once. It came in small pieces, the way most important truths do. The first time he seemed embarrassed by her job at a family dinner. The first time his mother asked very pleasantly what Evelyn's family did, and Evelyn said simply that her family was in business, and Diana Callahan smiled the smile of someone who has just had a suspicion confirmed. The first time Grant mentioned casually that he wished she had more ambition, that she had more drive, that she wasn't content to just coast through life, coasting. He thought she was coasting. She had wanted to laugh sometimes, not cruelly, just at the sheer cosmic irony of it. This man who measured success in business cards and zip codes and the brand of watch on your wrist, who had no idea that he had married a woman who had deliberately walked away from more money than he would earn in 100 lifetimes, this man thought she lacked ambition. She did not tell him the truth. She had decided years ago that she would not use the Whitmore name as a shield or a weapon, and she kept that decision even when keeping it cost her something. It cost her more than she expected. It cost her the marriage in the end. Not directly. Grant would have found a reason regardless. She understood that now on the other side of it. Grant had married her because he thought she was someone he could shape, someone whose ordinariness he could fix, someone who would eventually become grateful enough for his improvements that she would never challenge him. When she didn't become that person, when she remained stubbornly and quietly exactly who she was, he found someone else. Chelsea Farrow, 31, director of marketing at a mid-sized consulting firm, drove a car that cost twice what Evelyn earned in a year, talked about quarterly projections at dinner parties, and genuinely seemed to enjoy it. Grant thought that was success. Evelyn made tea and sat by her window and looked at the sliver of sky between the buildings and told herself for the 100th time that she did not begrudge him his happiness. She wanted to mean it. She was mostly there. The phone rang 3 days after the divorce was signed. She almost didn't answer it. It was a number she didn't recognize, and she had been ignoring those since the divorce proceedings began, when people who worked for Grant's attorneys sometimes called with questions she had no interest in answering. But something made her pick up. She could not have said what. A feeling, maybe. The particular quality of the silence before she answered, as if the air in the room had leaned slightly in the direction of the phone. Evelyn. One word. But it was enough. She knew the voice instantly, the way you know a voice that was the first voice you ever truly trusted, even when years have changed it, even when it has become rougher and smaller at the edges than it used to be. "Dad," she said. There was a pause on the line. Then another voice, one she didn't recognize. Professional and careful. "Miss Whitmore, this is Dr. Abrams calling from St. Catherine's Medical Center in Hartford. Your father has asked me to call you. He's asked me to tell you." A brief pause. "He's asked me to tell you that it's time." The tea went cold in her cup. Outside the window, the sky and the narrow gap between the buildings was the exact pale gray of early winter mornings. And Evelyn sat very still for a long moment, listening to her own breathing, listening to the distant traffic, listening to the silence that had opened up inside the phone call, like a room she had not expected to enter yet. "How long?" she asked. "The doctors believe weeks," Dr. Abrams said. "Possibly less. He has been—" Another careful pause. "He has been waiting to reach you. He has been insisting on it." She looked at the canvas bag by the door, the same one she had carried into the conference room 3 days ago, the same one she carried everywhere because she had made it a habit years ago to travel light. "I'll be there tomorrow," she said. She hung up. She sat in the quiet of the apartment for a long time. Then she stood up, rinsed her mug, and began to pack. Not because she was ready, not because she knew what she was walking back into, but because Alexander Whitmore had trusted her to leave and trusted her to come back, and whatever she owed that man, whatever debt exists between a father who lets you go and a daughter who chose to go, it was time. It was past time. And somewhere beneath the quiet of the apartment and the sound of the radiator and the smell of the tea that had gone cold in her cup, she could feel the door inside her, the one she had kept closed for so long, beginning finally to move. She didn't push it yet, she just let it move. And in the morning she drove to Hartford, and everything she had spent a decade running from drove quietly beside her, the whole way there waiting, as it had always been waiting for her to decide she was ready to stop. The drive to Hartford took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Evelyn knew because she watched the clock the entire way, not out of impatience, but because counting small things had always been how she managed large ones. She counted mile markers. She counted the number of times the radio signal faded and came back. She counted her own breaths at the moments when the weight of what she was driving toward pressed down hard enough that breathing required something close to conscious effort. She had not been back to Hartford in 6 years. 6 years since she had sat in her father's office and told him she needed to leave. 6 years since she had packed 2 bags, chosen a new name for her daily life, and driven away from the Whitmore estate on Chamberlain Road with the particular feeling of someone who has jumped from a high place and has not yet decided whether what they feel is terror or relief. 6 years. And now the road was pulling her back like a rope she had never fully let go of. She arrived at St. Catherine's Medical Center just before noon. The parking structure was full, so she left her car on the street 2 blocks away and walked. The December air was sharp and smelled like car exhaust and the first distant suggestion of snow. She pulled her coat tighter and walked quickly, her canvas bag over one shoulder, her flat shoes making quiet sounds on the concrete. Inside the hospital, the woman at the front desk looked at her, the way people in hospitals look at everyone, with the professional kindness of someone who has learned to be gentle with strangers, because you never know what weight they are carrying in through the door. "I'm here to see Alexander Whitmore," Evelyn said. The woman typed something. Then she looked up. "Are you family? I'm his daughter." Something shifted in the woman's expression. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition, as if that particular answer explained something she had been quietly curious about. "Room 417, she said. "Dr. Abrams is expecting you." Evelyn took the elevator to the 4th floor. The hallway was long and white and very quiet, the kind of quiet that hospitals manufacture to suggest calm, but which actually communicates something closer to the opposite. She found room 417 at the end of the hall and stood outside the door for exactly 3 seconds before she pushed it open. Her father looked smaller than she remembered. That was the first thing. That was the thing that hit her before anything else, before the smell of the room or the sound of the monitors or the sight of the IV line taped to the back of his hand. Alexander Whitmore, who had always seemed to fill every room he entered simply by existing in it, looked in that hospital bed like a man who had been negotiating with the world for a very long time and had recently agreed to some significant concessions. But his eyes were the same, dark and steady and sharp, the eyes of a man whose mind had not made any concessions at all. "You came," he said. His voice was rougher, quieter, but still his. "Of course I came," Evelyn said. She crossed the room and sat in the chair beside his bed, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the monitors beeped softly, and outside the window the pale December sky hung over Hartford like a held breath. "How long have you known?" she asked. "That it was serious about 8 months," he paused. "That it was this serious about 6 weeks." "You didn't call me." "No." "Why?" He looked at her steadily. "Because I knew if I called you, you would come back, and I wanted you to come back when you were ready, not because I scared you into it." Evelyn absorbed that. It was so entirely like him, so perfectly characteristic of the particular and maddening way Alexander Whitmore expressed love, which was always through the granting of freedom, rather than the requesting of presence, that she felt something in her chest that was not quite grief and not quite gratitude, but lived somewhere between the two. "I got divorced 3 days ago," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The grocery store man. Grant Callahan. I was in real estate." "I know what he was." Another pause, careful and deliberate. "Are you all right?" "Yes." "Don't say yes the way you say it when you mean not yet." She almost smiled. "I'm not all right the way I would be if it had never happened, but I'm all right enough. The marriage—" She stopped, started again. "The marriage showed me things I needed to see, about him, about myself, about what I'd been willing to accept to avoid being alone." Her father nodded slowly. He didn't offer comfort or analysis. He just nodded, which was exactly what she needed from him. "Tell me about the company," she said. And that was when the conversation changed. Alexander Whitmore had spent the previous 18 months, he told her, systematically preparing for the inevitable. Not death itself, which he discussed with the matter-of-fact practicality of a man who had negotiated difficult outcomes his entire career, but the transition, the transfer of everything he had built. The question of what happened to Whitmore Holdings when Alexander Whitmore was no longer there to hold it. The company by any measure was extraordinary. What had begun as a regional technology firm 30 years ago had grown through a combination of strategic acquisition, genuine innovation, and the particular relentless vision that Alexander brought to everything he touched, into something that operated on a scale that most people never fully grasped, even when they read the numbers. Whitmore Holdings controlled significant stakes in dozens of companies across technology, healthcare infrastructure, and renewable energy. It managed a humanitarian foundation that operated programs in 31 countries. Its annual revenues moved in a range that, when Evelyn finally heard the updated figures stated plainly, made her sit very still for a moment and just breathe. She had known the general shape of it, of course. She had grown up inside it. But 6 years of grocery store shifts and thin-walled apartments had done something interesting to her understanding of scale, and hearing the numbers now on this side of the life she had lived felt different than it had at 23. "The board has been managing," her father said. "Richard Chen has been acting as interim chair. He's capable, but he's a caretaker, not a visionary. He knows it. I know it. The board knows it. And I've been very specific in my planning about who I want at the helm." Evelyn looked at him. "Nathan isn't ready," her father continued. "He knows that too, and to his credit, he agrees with me completely. He'll tell you himself. Nathan is brilliant at certain things, operations, numbers, the mechanical side of running a large organization. But the thing that this company needs right now, the thing that will determine whether it becomes what I always believed it could become, is not mechanical. What is it? Alexander Whitmore looked at his daughter for a long moment. It needs someone who knows what ordinary people actually need, he said. Not what they say they need in focus groups. Not what consultants decide they need after reviewing demographic data. What they actually genuinely in the real course of their real lives need. And there is exactly one person connected to this organization who has spent the last 6 years finding that out from the inside. The room was very quiet. Dad, Evelyn said carefully, I'm not asking you to decide right now. Dad, I'm asking you to listen, and then I'm asking you to think about it. And then when you're ready, I want you to have a conversation with Nathan and with Richard and with the board. But before any of that, he reached toward the small table beside his bed, and with the deliberate, slightly effortful movement of a man who was conserving energy carefully, he opened a drawer and removed a sealed envelope. He held it toward her. I need you to read this. She took it. Her name was written on the front in her father's handwriting. Not the current version of his handwriting diminished by illness and medication. The old version, strong and angular and absolutely certain of itself, which meant he had written it months ago, maybe longer at a time, when his hands were still fully his. She held the envelope in both hands and looked at it. Not here, he said. Not while I'm watching you. Take it home. Read it tonight, and then come back tomorrow and we'll talk. She looked up at him. Promise me, he said. Not the way parents say it to extract compliance, the way people say it when the ask is the last version of something they have been carrying for a long time. I promise, she said. She stayed another 2 hours. They talked about smaller things. Nathan's recent work restructuring the operations division, a community health program the foundation had launched in rural Tennessee, a documentary someone had made about the company's early years that Alexander had apparently watched once and found almost entirely inaccurate, but oddly charming. They talk the way people talk when they know that time is not unlimited, and they have chosen consciously to spend it on the texture of a relationship rather than its logistics. When she left, she kissed her father on the forehead. He caught her hand as she straightened up and held it for just a moment. I'm glad you came back, he said. I know, she said. Me too. She walked back down the long white hallway, rode the elevator down, walked 2 blocks through the cold to her car. She drove to the Whitmore estate on Chamberlain Road where Nathan was waiting, because of course he was, because Nathan had always been the one who waited. I was standing in the front hallway when she came through the door, and he looked at her for 1 second, and then crossed the distance between them in about 3 strides and put his arms around her. He was 29 now, and he had gotten taller since she last saw him, which felt like a personal affront, because she remembered him as the 14-year-old who used to follow her around the house, asking why she read so much. You look terrible, he said into her hair. Thank you, she said. You look like someone who hasn't slept properly in weeks. 6 weeks, he confirmed. He pulled back and looked at her. His eyes were red at the edges. He had been crying recently, or not sleeping, or both. He's been asking about you every day. I know. He wouldn't let me call you. Said you'd come when you were ready. Nathan shook his head. I've been arguing with a man in a hospital bed for 6 weeks that his daughter might want to know what's happening, and he stopped. He just kept saying you'd come. He was right, Evelyn said. He's always right. It's one of his more aggravating qualities. Nathan looked at the envelope in her hand. He gave you the letter. Yes. Do you know what's in it? Not yet. He told me to read it tonight. Nathan nodded. He looked like he wanted to say more and was disciplining himself not to. That was new. The Nathan she remembered said everything he thought immediately and in full, with a kind of verbal velocity that could be exhausting, and was also, she had always thought, one of his most genuine qualities. The Nathan standing in front of her now had learned at some cost she could see in his face to hold things. Come eat something, he said. You've been driving for 4 hours. She let him feed her. They sat at the kitchen table in the big house that she had grown up in, and Nathan made sandwiches with the focused energy of someone who needed a task, and they actually talked the way they had when she was 17 and he was 11, and she would come home from school and sit at this same table and tell him things she didn't tell anyone else, because even then she had understood that her little brother had an unusual capacity for listening without judgment. She told him about the divorce, about Grant, about the conference room and the papers on the floor, floor and Diana Callahan laughing into her coffee cup. She told it without self-pity, just as a sequence of events that had happened and now were over, and Nathan listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which she reflected confirmed how much he had grown. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He threw the papers at you." He slid them, hard, in front of his mother, and his sister, and his girlfriend. Nathan's jaw tightened slightly. He looked down at his sandwich. "Okay," he said in the tone of someone filing information away in a place they intend to return to. "Nathan," she said, "I'm not going to do anything." "I know, but I wanted to say it anyway." He looked up. "Are you actually okay? Not the version you tell Dad, the real version." She thought about it honestly, the way she always tried to think about things that deserved honesty. "I'm sad about what I thought it was going to be," she said finally. "At the beginning, when I thought he was someone who actually wanted to know me. That version, I'm sad about losing that. But what it actually was..." She shook her head. "No, I'm not sad about that being over. I'm relieved." Nathan nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "Good." After dinner, she went to her old room, which had been kept exactly as she left it, a detail that she suspected was less about sentimentality and more about the fact that Alexander Whitmore was not the kind of person who redecorated. She sat on the edge of the bed, turned the envelope over in her hands, and opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter on Whitmore Holdings stationery, 4 pages. Her father's strong, angular handwriting, dense and deliberate, and completely unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world when he wrote it, even though they both knew by then that he didn't. She read it twice. The first time she read it, the way you read something that is arriving too fast for full comprehension, absorbing sentences and paragraphs in pieces, the meaning assembling itself unevenly like a photograph developing in stages. The second time she read it slowly from the beginning, and by the time she reached the last paragraph, she was sitting very still on the edge of the bed with the pages in her hands and the room very quiet around her, and something happening inside her chest that was not grief and not fear and not excitement, but contained elements of all three in proportions she couldn't immediately separate. Her father had not simply left her the company. He had left her a full and detailed accounting of why. Not the legal reasoning, not the board rationale, but the actual personal father-to-daughter accounting of why he believed with the certainty of a man who had built something extraordinary and had watched his daughter quietly for decades, that Evelyn was the right person, not just to inherit the Whitmore legacy, but to transform it. He wrote about the day she came to his office and said she needed to leave. He wrote that he had gone home that night and sat in the dark in his study for 3 hours, and his wife, Evelyn's mother, who had passed away when Evelyn was 18, had once told him that the greatest mistake powerful people made was believing that power was the same as understanding. He wrote that when Evelyn left, he had understood for the first time what his wife meant. He wrote about the reports he had received over the years, not surveillance, he was careful to say, simply the natural awareness of a father who knew the world his daughter was moving through. Reports that told him she was well, that she was working, that she was by every external measure choosing the harder path, when the easier one was always available to her, and choosing it not because she was punishing herself, but because she genuinely deeply believed in the value of what she was learning. He wrote, "I have sat across tables from hundreds of people in my career who were intelligent. I have sat across from many who were capable. I have sat across from a handful who were visionary. But I have rarely sat across from someone who was genuinely wise. Wisdom is different from intelligence. Wisdom comes from choosing repeatedly and deliberately to understand things from the inside instead of the outside. You have spent 6 years becoming wise, Evelyn. This company does not need another intelligent person. It needs what you have become." She set the pages down on the bed. She pressed both hands flat against her knees and breathed. And then, in the quiet of her childhood bedroom with the December night pressing against the windows and the faint sound of the old house settling around her, Evelyn Whitmore made a decision. Not about the company, not yet, not completely, but about something prior to that, something foundational. She decided to stop running. Not from the name, not from the money, not from the responsibility that had been waiting for her at the end of this road since before she had the courage to walk it. She decided to stop running from the version of herself that her father had always believed she was capable of becoming. In the morning, she called Dr. Abrams before she did anything else. "His condition overnight?" she asked. Stable, Dr. Abrams said, but I want to be clear with you. Miss Whitmore stable in his case means we are managing, not improving. I understand. He's been asking about you this morning already. Tell him I'll be there by 9. She was there by 8:45. Her father was awake and more alert than the day before, sitting up slightly in the bed with the focused expression of a man who had slept for the specific purpose of preparing to have a conversation. You read it, he said the moment she walked in. Yes. And she sat down. She leaned forward, put her hands together and looked at him directly the way she had learned to look at people when she needed them to understand that she was being completely serious. I have conditions, she said. Her father's eyes sharpened. He almost smiled. Tell me. I don't run the company the way it's been run. I'm not interested in inheriting a structure and maintaining it. If I come in, I change things, significantly. What kind of changes? The foundation becomes central, not peripheral. It stops being a PR mechanism and starts being an actual operating priority. The humanitarian programs get real resources and real decision-making power, not charity budget allocations. The technology divisions refocus at least 30% of their development capacity toward practical problems: healthcare access, education, infrastructure, community resources. The kind of things that ordinary people actually need, as opposed to the kind of things that win awards at industry conferences. Her father was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face very often. Something that combined pride and satisfaction in equal parts with something else, something that looked unmistakably like relief. Anything else, he said. Nathan stays, in an expanded role. He's better than you've given him room to be. Agreed. And I want 6 months, before any public announcement, before any board formality, before the press gets involved in any way. 6 months to learn the current state of the company properly, to build relationships with the people who actually run things day to day, to understand what I'm taking on from the inside before I have to defend it from the outside. The board won't like the 6 months, her father said. The board can manage for 6 months. Richard Chen has been managing. He'll continue managing. Richard will want assurances. Then I'll meet with Richard. Her father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You sound like someone who's been thinking about this for longer than 3 days. Evelyn looked at him. I've been thinking about this since I left, she said quietly. I just needed to know if what I went to find was actually there before I came back for this. And is it? She thought about the grocery store on Maple Avenue where she had worked for 2 years, and the elderly man named Gerald, who used to come in every Thursday and always needed help reaching the soup cans on the top shelf, and who had once told her with complete seriousness that the thing nobody understood about getting old was that what you missed wasn't the things you used to have, but the feeling of being seen. She thought about the women at the community health clinic who came in with their children and sat for hours in those plastic chairs because they didn't have anywhere else to go for basic care. She thought about the seniors she had delivered meals to, the ones who opened the door and offered her coffee before she had even set the containers down because they were lonely and she was a person standing in their doorway, and that was enough. She thought about all of it. Yes, she said, it's there. Her father nodded once. Then we have a lot to discuss, he said. They talked for 3 hours that morning. Real conversation, operational and strategic, and also personal, in the way that only conversations between people who love each other and are running out of time can be. Her father told her things about the company's current challenges that the board reports hadn't fully captured. He told her about the internal politics, the alliances, the 2 or 3 key figures whose trust she would need to earn quickly, and whose opposition she should expect and understand rather than fear. He told her which board members would push back and why, and he told her what each of them actually cared about, beneath what they said they cared about, which he had learned over decades was never quite the same thing. Nathan arrived at 11. He came in and saw the 2 of them talking, and stopped in the doorway with an expression that was so unguarded, so purely relieved, that Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. "You're coming back," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm coming back," she said. He sat down without saying anything else, but the way he sat, the way the tension went out of his shoulders, the way he leaned forward and put his hands on his knees with the posture of someone who has been braced for bad news for so long that the arrival of good news requires a physical readjustment, said everything. The 3 of them stayed until early afternoon. When Evelyn finally left the hospital that day, she stood on the sidewalk outside for a moment in the cold December air, her canvas bag over her shoulder, the envelope from her father's letter folded and tucked into the inner pocket of her coat against her chest. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. It was a number she recognized, one she had not expected to see, Grant Callahan. She stared at the name on the screen for a long moment. Then she pressed decline, put the phone in her bag, and started walking. She had nothing to say to Grant Callahan. Not today. Not at this particular juncture when she was standing on the sidewalk outside her father's hospital on a December afternoon, carrying a letter that had just reordered everything she thought she understood about where her life was going. Not today. But as she walked back toward her car, she was aware in the particular way that people become aware of things they have been avoiding thinking about, of the fact that the world she was returning to was going to intersect at some point with the world she had just left. That the woman who had signed divorce papers 3 days ago in a gray sweater with a canvas bag over her shoulder was about to become someone that people would talk about differently. That the name she had been careful for 6 years to keep quiet was about to stop being quiet. And she thought about Grant's face in that conference room, the way he had slid those papers across the table, the way his mother had laughed, the way Chelsea Farrow had smiled in her champagne blouse. She did not feel angry. She felt something quieter than anger and more permanent. She felt clear. She got in her car. She sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel and the engine running. Then she drove back to the estate, back to Nathan, back to the house she had grown up in, and left, and was now, for the first time in 6 years, returning to with every intention of staying. And in the pocket of her coat against her chest, the letter from her father rested like something settled and solid, like the last word in a very long conversation, like a door that had not been closed after all, but had simply been waiting with the particular patience of things that are certain of their own existence for her to come back and walk through it. The house on Chamberlain Road was quiet when she got back. Nathan had beaten her home. He was at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a legal pad full of handwritten notes beside him, and when she came in, he looked up with the expression of someone who has been sitting on information and is very glad the wait is over. "I've been pulling together the current operational overview," he said. "The real one, not the board summary. There's a lot we need to talk about." "I know," Evelyn said. She sat down across from him. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said quietly, "I'm glad you're here, Evie. I don't know how to say that in a way that doesn't sound inadequate, but I'm glad." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "Me too," she said, and she meant it in every direction at once toward him, toward her father, toward the decision she had made, sitting on the edge of her childhood bed with a letter in her hands and a door finally beginning to open. She looked at his notes. She looked at his screen. She pulled her chair closer to the table. "All right," she said. "Show me everything." Nathan's notes covered 14 pages of the legal pad, and by the time Evelyn had read through all of them, it was past midnight, and the kitchen had grown cold around them, and neither of them had noticed, because they had been too deep inside the numbers, the structures, the names, the problems. The problems were real. That was the first thing Evelyn understood clearly, reading through Nathan's operational overview, with the methodical attention she brought to everything that mattered. Whitmore Holdings was not a company in crisis. It was something more complicated than that, a company of extraordinary strength that had been operating for the past several years without a unifying vision. Richard Chen was competent and careful, and exactly what her father had said. He was a caretaker. He had kept things running. He had not let anything break. But he had also not built anything new, and in the world Whitmore Holdings operated in standing still was its own kind of slow decline. "The technology division is the most urgent," Nathan said. He was on his third cup of coffee and had stopped pretending to be calm about 45 minutes ago. "Marcus Webb has been running it since Dad stepped back from day-to-day operations. He's smart, but his entire strategic focus is on high-margin consumer products, the kind of thing that wins design awards and gets written up in magazines. Meanwhile, the healthcare technology subdivision, the one that was supposed to be developing diagnostic tools for underserved communities, has been quietly defunded over the past 2 years, budget reallocated. Who approved that? Webb proposed it. Chen signed off. The board ratified it in a meeting that lasted 11 minutes. Evelyn looked at him. 11 minutes. I have the transcript. Nathan pushed a printed document across the table. 11 minutes and 40 seconds to be precise. They barely discussed it. She picked up the transcript, read through it, set it down. "And the foundation?" she asked. Nathan's expression did something complicated. "The foundation is okay. This is the part that's going to make you angry." "Tell me." "The foundation's budget has been cut by 38% over the past 3 years. The programs that remained are largely ceremonial at this point. Press events, photo opportunities. The actual operational programs, the ones doing real work in rural healthcare and education and community infrastructure, most of them have been quietly wound down or handed off to smaller organizations without the resources to run them properly." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Dad doesn't know the extent of it," Nathan said. "Or he does know and he's been too sick to fight it the way he would have fought it before. I'm not sure which is worse." "Who made those decisions?" "Webb, primarily, with Chen's passive approval. There's a board member, Harriet Voss, who raised objections about 14 months ago. She sent a formal memo. It was tabled, and never picked back up." Evelyn stood up. She walked to the kitchen window and stood there for a moment with her back to Nathan, looking at the dark glass. She was not angry the way she might have expected to be angry. She was something colder and more precise than anger, something that had a specific temperature and a specific direction. "Where is Harriet Voss now?" she asked. "Still on the board, still raising quiet objections, still being tabled." Evelyn turned around. "Call her tomorrow. Tell her I want to meet." Nathan blinked. "You haven't even officially, the board doesn't know yet that you're—" "I know. Call her anyway. Tell her Alexander Whitmore's daughter would like to have coffee. That's all. See what she says." Nathan picked up his pen and wrote it down. He did not ask questions. That was one of his best qualities. They worked until 2 in the morning. When Evelyn finally went to bed, she lay in the dark of her childhood bedroom and listened to the house settle around her and thought about the 18 months between her father's initial diagnosis and her arrival and what had happened to the company in that time while Alexander Whitmore was managing his own mortality, and what it meant that the people he had trusted most had used that time not to honor his vision, but to quietly, methodically dismantle the parts of it that were inconvenient. She thought about the healthcare technology subdivision, about the diagnostic tools for underserved communities, about the women at the clinic on Maple Avenue who sat in plastic chairs for hours because they had nowhere else to go for basic care. She thought about Marcus Webb, who had defunded that program to reallocate the budget toward consumer products that won design awards. She fell asleep around 3, and her sleep was deep and dreamless, the sleep of someone who has made a decision and is resting inside the certainty of it. At 7 the next morning, she was back at the hospital. Her father was having a harder day. She could see it immediately, the color of his skin, the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated pain being managed rather than absent. But his mind was exactly where it had been, precise and focused, and completely unwilling to offer his body any concessions it could avoid. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said when she came in. "I slept 3 hours. Nathan showed you the real numbers." "Yes. And—" She sat down. "Tell me about Marcus Webb." Her father's expression shifted, just slightly, but she had known his face her entire life, and she caught it. "He's talented," her father said carefully. "That's not what I asked." A pause. "Marcus Webb is someone who believes that a company's primary responsibility is to its shareholders. He is skilled at making that argument in ways that sound like they serve everyone, when in fact they serve a very specific set of interests. He defunded the healthcare technology subdivision." "Yes." "With Chen's approval." "Yes." "While you were sick." Her father looked at her steadily. "While I was distracted," he said, "which is what happens when the person who built something stops being able to protect it every single day. Things move in directions you didn't authorize. People fill the vacuum. It's one of the reasons—" He stopped. "It's one of the reasons this transition matters as much as it does. Not just the legal transfer of authority, the actual practical on-the-ground reestablishment of what this company is supposed to be." "I want Webb out," Evelyn said. "Not immediately, not in a way that destabilizes the division, but within 6 months I want him gone, and I want someone in that role who understands that the technology division's mandate includes the healthcare and community work, not despite its effect on margins, but because of it." Her father was quiet for a moment. "The board won't make it easy," he said. "I know. Webb has allies, strong ones." "I know that too." Evelyn leaned forward. "Dad, I've been watching for the past 12 hours. I understand what I'm walking into. I'm not walking in expecting it to be easy. I'm walking in because it needs to be done. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face, something she recognized finally as the expression he wore when he was satisfied. "All right," he said. "I need you to call Richard Chen today," she said. "I need you to tell him that I'm here and that I'll be meeting with him before the end of the week. Don't tell him more than that yet. Just that I'm here." "Done. And I need you to sign the preliminary transfer documentation. The legal team has it prepared," Nathan told me. "I want it signed today while you can still—" She stopped herself. "While I'm still sharp," her father finished gently. "You can say it, Evelyn." "While you're still sharp," she said. "Yes." He nodded. "Call the attorney's office. Tell them to bring it this afternoon." She made the call from the hallway outside his room. The attorney's name was Margaret Solano, and she had been Alexander Whitmore's personal legal counsel for 22 years. And when Evelyn said her name and explained what she needed, there was a pause on the line that contained several things at once: surprise, relief, and the particular professional satisfaction of someone whose client has finally made a decision they have been waiting for. "I'll be there at 2 o'clock, Margaret said. She was there at 1:53. She was a small, precise woman in her early 60s, with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and she brought 2 associates and a leather briefcase, and the focused energy of someone who had been keeping very important documents very safe for a very long time and was now prepared to deploy them. Evelyn sat in on the meeting. She read every document before her father signed it, which Margaret clearly expected and approved of. And when everything was done, when the last signature was witnessed and the last page was turned, Margaret looked at Evelyn over her reading glasses with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was something warmer. "It's good to meet you," she said. "Your father has spoken of you often." "Good things?" Evelyn asked. "Exclusively," Margaret said. "Although he expressed concern on several occasions that you were working too hard at jobs that didn't pay you enough. He found that ironic." Evelyn felt something crack very slightly in her chest. She pressed it back together quickly, the way she had always done with things that threatened to become bigger than the moment allowed. "Thank you for being here," she said. Margaret gathered her papers with crisp efficiency. As she was leaving, she paused at the door and turned back. "The board meeting is in 3 weeks," she said. "If you want my professional advice, be there, in person. Don't let Chen introduce you on paper or by proxy. Walk into that room yourself and introduce yourself. It will set a tone that every other interaction you have with those people will be colored by." "I'll be there," Evelyn said. Margaret nodded once satisfied and left. Her father had fallen asleep by the time the attorneys departed. He slept with the depth of someone who has finished something important and allowed himself to rest. Evelyn sat beside his bed for a while, not doing anything, just sitting the way she had learned to sit with difficult things over 6 years of choosing a life that required it. Her phone buzzed. "Nathan." A text message. Just 4 words. Harriet Voss said yes. She typed back, "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Then she sat quietly beside her sleeping father and thought about 3 weeks from now. About walking into a boardroom full of people who did not know her. About Marcus Webb's face when she came through that door. About what it meant to walk into a room as yourself completely openly, without any version of hiding for the first time in 6 years. She was not afraid. She was, if she was being precise about it, ready. Harriet Voss was 61 years old and had been on the Whitmore Holdings board for 9 years, and she walked into the coffee shop the next morning with the bearing of a woman who had sat in enough rooms where people tried to minimize her that she had long since stopped giving those rooms the satisfaction of knowing it worked. She saw Evelyn and she stopped. Then she came over and sat down and said without preamble, "You look like your father." "People say that," Evelyn said. "It's not entirely a compliment. He was very stubborn." "So am I." Harriet looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Good, because you are going to need to be." They talked for 2 hours. Harriet was direct in the way that people are direct when they have spent years being indirect out of necessity and have recently decided they are too old and too tired for it. She told Evelyn the board's internal dynamics in clear, specific terms, who would support the transition, who would resist it, and who would perform support in public while working against it in private, which she considered the most dangerous category. "Webb is the latter," she said. "He will welcome you warmly. He will tell you that he is committed to whatever vision you bring. He will ask intelligent questions in meetings that signal alignment, and then he will spend every hour outside those meetings undermining every initiative that threatens his division's current trajectory. I've dealt with people like that, Evelyn said. Harriet looked at her with something that might have been skepticism. You've worked in grocery stores and community centers for the past 6 years. Yes, Evelyn said, and in every organization I worked in there was a version of Marcus Webb, someone who was good at performing the values of the organization while systematically protecting their own position. The scale is different here, the behavior isn't. Harriet was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father told me about a year ago that he believed you were going to be a better leader than he was. I thought he was being sentimental. Now I'm less sure." "I don't need to be better than him," Evelyn said. "I need to be what the company needs now. That might not be the same thing he was." Harriet nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to be exactly what you've been," Evelyn said. "The person in the room who says the true thing when other people are saying the convenient thing. I need you on my side, openly. I need the board to see when I walk in 3 weeks from now that Harriet Voss is not waiting to see which way the wind blows. And in return, the healthcare and community programs get restored, fully, with real resources and Harriet sat back. She looked at Evelyn with an expression that was taking the full measure of her slowly and without any pretense of doing anything else. "All right," she said, "you have me." The next 2 weeks moved at a pace that Evelyn had not experienced since the early days of the marriages that period, when everything is accelerating and you are running to keep up with your own life. She met with Richard Chen, who was a careful, intelligent, somewhat exhausted man of 58, who had been holding the company together through force of professional will, and who, when he understood that the transition was real and imminent, and that Evelyn was not what he had expected, visibly relaxed in a way that made her think his exhaustion was more profound than she had initially read. "I want to be transparent with you," Chen said in their first meeting. They were at the estate in the formal study that had always been her father's room, which felt slightly strange to occupy but necessary. "I have made decisions in the last 18 months that I believe your father would have made differently if he had been fully operational. I want you to know that I know that." "Tell me which ones," Evelyn said. He told her. All of them. He was thorough and unsparing about his own choices, and she respected that even as some of what he said made her jaw tighten. The foundation cuts, the healthcare subdivision, 3 community partnerships that had been allowed to lapse, a proposed collaboration with a rural education nonprofit that Webb had killed in committee. "Why did you let Webb have that much authority?" she asked. Chen was quiet for a moment. "Because he was the most operationally confident voice in the room when your father stepped back, and confidence is when leadership is uncertain. Confidence fills the vacuum. I should have pushed back harder. I didn't. That's mine to own." "I appreciate the honesty," Evelyn said. "I'm going to need people around me who will tell me true things quickly. The question for me right now is whether you're one of those people." He looked at her steadily. "I'd like to be." "Then stay," she said. "Different role. I want you focused specifically on the operational restructuring of the healthcare and community divisions. Use that same careful, thorough energy you've been using to hold things together and put it into rebuilding what was taken apart. Can you do that?" He blinked. Whatever he had expected from this meeting, that wasn't it. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I can do that." 2 days before the board meeting. Nathan came into the kitchen at 7 in the morning with his laptop and an expression that meant something had happened. "What?" Evelyn said immediately. "Callahan Realty," he said. He turned the laptop toward her. She looked at the screen. A business news brief mid-tier publication but respectable. The headline read, "Callahan Realty loses major investor backing, CEO faces questions over failed development project." She read the article. Grant had been pursuing a major commercial development deal in the city, something he had apparently been working on for the better part of a year and had staked significant credibility on. The lead investor had pulled out 48 hours ago. The reasons cited were concerns about mismanagement and a pattern of optimistic projections that hadn't been supported by the underlying financial analysis. She set the laptop down. Nathan was watching her carefully. "You don't have to care about this," he said. "I don't," she said. "Not the way you think." "Then why do you look like that?" "Because I feel sorry for him." She said it slowly, testing whether it was true. It was, she found, partially. in the limited, clear-eyed way that you can feel sorry for someone who made their own choices and arrived at their own consequences without blaming themselves enough to be honest about it. He's going to have a very hard time, and part of the reason he's going to have a hard time is that he never learned how to value what was actually real. Nathan looked at her for a moment. That's a very generous interpretation of a man who threw divorce papers at you on the floor. He slid them, she said. And yes, it is generous. I'm choosing to be generous, for my own sake, not his. Nathan closed the laptop. Okay, he said. Focus on the board meeting, she said. Right, about that. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Webb called me last night. She looked up. What? He called me. Not you. Me. Told me he was looking forward to the transition. Told me he had always believed in the Whitmore family's vision for the company. Told me, and this is the part you need to know, that he hoped the new leadership would rely heavily on the existing management team's expertise during the adjustment period. Evelyn stared at him. He's already trying to position himself. Before you've even walked in the room. What did you say? I said I'd pass along his enthusiasm. Nathan smiled thinly, and then I called Harriet. The morning of the board meeting arrived with the particular quality that important mornings sometimes have a slight heightening of everything. Sounds a little sharper, time moving with a different weight than ordinary time. Evelyn was up at 5:30. She dressed carefully, not to impress, to communicate. There was a difference she had thought about for days. She was not trying to perform power. She was not trying to dress the way someone who runs a trillion-dollar organization is expected to dress. She was trying to look like herself fully, precisely, without apology, and to let that be enough. Dark blazer, simple blouse, flat shoes because she had never been comfortable in heels, and she had promised herself years ago that the life she stepped back into would not require her to be uncomfortable in her own body. Nathan drove. In the car, he didn't say much. He understood her silences by now, the way only siblings can understood that what she needed in the 20 minutes before she walked into that room was not reassurance or last-minute strategy. What she needed was simply not to be alone. The Whitmore Holdings headquarters was a building she had been in many times as a child, had not entered in 6 years, and was now about to enter as the person who controlled it. That was a sentence she turned over in her mind on the drive and could not quite make feel real, the way very large, true things sometimes resist feeling real, even when you know them completely. They arrived at 8:45. The board meeting was at 9. Margaret Solano was waiting in the lobby. Beside her was a woman Evelyn didn't recognize, younger, dark suit, carrying a tablet with the focused expression of someone whose job was to know every name in the room before entering it. This is Claire Huang, Margaret said. She's been your father's executive liaison to the board for the past year. She knows everyone in that room, and she knows them well. She'll walk in with you. Evelyn looked at Claire. Tell me the one thing I need to know about Marcus Webb, she said. The one thing that doesn't show up in a board bio. Claire didn't hesitate. He hates being surprised. He prepares for every meeting more thoroughly than anyone else in the room, and his confidence is built on the certainty that he knows what's coming. Anything he doesn't see coming unsettles him in a way he's very bad at hiding. Evelyn nodded slowly. Good, she said. At 9 o'clock exactly, she walked through the doors of the boardroom. There were 14 people in the room. She had studied all of their faces from photographs Nathan had compiled. She knew their backgrounds, their positions, their relationships with each other, their relationships with her father, and where Harriet had been able to provide it, the gap between what they said in meetings and what they actually wanted. They looked up when she came in. She had thought about this moment. She had decided deliberately not to perform it, not to enter with calculated presence or rehearsed confidence. She was simply going to walk in and be exactly who she was, and whatever that communicated to these 14 people was going to have to be enough. She walked to the head of the table. Marcus Webb was seated 4 chairs down on the right side. He was handsome in the polished way of men who understand that appearance is part of authority, silver-haired and sharp-eyed and wearing the expression of someone who is performing relaxed confidence. He smiled when she came in. It was a good smile. She had been warned it would be. She looked at him for exactly 1 second, then looked at the full room. My name is Evelyn Whitmore, she said. My father built this company over 30 years. I've been away for 6. I want you to know before anything else that I am aware of exactly what the past 18 months have looked like from the inside. I've read the documents. I've had the conversations. I know where the gaps are, and I know how they got there. The room was very still. "I'm not here to assign blame for what happened while my father's attention was elsewhere," she continued. "I'm here to tell you what's going to happen now. The Healthcare Technology Subdivision is being restored and expanded. The foundation programs are being fully refunded and restructured with operational priority, not ceremonial budget. The Rural Education Partnership that was killed in committee 14 months ago is being reopened." She paused. "Let that sit. I know some of you have questions about whether I'm qualified to lead this organization. That's a fair question and I respect it. My answer is this: I spent 6 years working in the communities that this company's foundation is supposed to serve. I know what those people need because I lived beside them and worked alongside them and watched from the inside how the decisions made in rooms like this one land in their actual lives. That is the perspective I am bringing to this table, and it is not a perspective that currently exists anywhere on this board." She pulled out her chair and sat down. "Now," she said, "let's talk about the next 6 months." Webb spoke first. Exactly as Harriet had predicted, his opening was warm and aligned and full of expressed enthusiasm. He talked about the company's trajectory, about the importance of vision, about his commitment to whatever direction leadership chose to pursue. He did not mention the healthcare subdivision or the foundation. He did not mention the Rural Education Partnership. He talked for 4 minutes without saying anything that could be held against him. When he finished, Evelyn looked at him directly and said, "Marcus, I want to address the reallocation of the Healthcare Technology Subdivision budget directly, since it's the most significant structural decision made in the past year and a half. Walk me through your reasoning." The room went very quiet. Webb's smile remained in place, but something behind his eyes moved a quick, involuntary recalibration, exactly what Claire had described. "Of course," he said. "The reallocation was driven by—" "I've read the documentation," Evelyn said. "I want to hear you say the reasoning out loud, in this room, today." Another pause, shorter this time because Webb was skilled and he recovered quickly. But it was there. Everyone in the room saw it. He talked for another 3 minutes. The reasoning was what she expected: margin analysis, strategic focus, resource optimization, delivered with the practiced fluency of someone who had made this case several times and believed it completely. When he finished, she said simply, "Thank you. That helps me understand what we're correcting and why. Not what we need to discuss, what we're correcting and why." She watched that land. Harriet Voss, seated at the far end of the table, caught Evelyn's eye for just a fraction of a second. The expression on her face was not quite a smile, but it was something. The meeting ran 2 hours and 40 minutes. By the end of it, Evelyn had laid out her operational priorities for the first 6 months with enough specificity that nobody in the room could claim afterward to have been unclear about her intentions. She had asked sharp questions of 4 other board members, questions that were not hostile, but that made clear she had done the work, that she understood the details, that she was not going to be managed. She had not raised her voice once. She had not apologized for anything. She had not performed warmth or ease. She had simply been present, specific, and completely unflinchingly herself. When it was over and people were gathering their things, Claire appeared at her elbow and said quietly, "That was not what most of them were expecting." "Good," Evelyn said. "Webb is going to spend the next 24 hours making phone calls." "Let him," Evelyn said. "He can make all the calls he wants. The documentation is already signed. The authority is already transferred. He can call everyone in his contact list, and it won't change the structural reality." She paused. "But note who he calls. I want to know." Claire nodded and wrote something on her tablet. Nathan was waiting in the lobby. He had not been in the meeting. They had agreed that was better, that walking in together read as nervous rather than prepared. He looked up when she came through the door, and his face asked the question before his mouth did. "It went well," she said. "Define well." "Webb is rattled. Harriet is solid. Chen is on board with the restructuring. 4 board members I wasn't sure about asked good questions, which means they're engaged. And everyone in that room now understands that I know exactly what happened to this company while Dad was sick." Nathan let out a long breath. "Okay," he said. "Okay, good. Okay." She looked at him. He had been carrying this for months alone, the company, their father's illness, the slow erosion of everything. Alexander Whitmore had built, and the relief on his face now was the real thing, unguarded and complete. "It's going to be a long 6 months," she said. "I know. Are you ready for it?" He straightened up, squared his shoulders, and she saw in that moment a reflection of something she recognized, not from him specifically, but from herself, from the version of herself that had signed divorce papers on a Monday and arrived at a hospital on a Thursday, and walked into a boardroom 2 weeks later and sat at the head of the table. The willingness to do the necessary thing, regardless of whether you feel fully ready for it. "Yes," he said. "Let's go." They walked out together into the December afternoon, and behind them in the boardroom on the 22nd floor, 14 people who had just met Evelyn Whitmore were sitting with the understanding that something had changed. Not gradually, not tentatively, completely and right now, and without any possibility of going back. The week after the board meeting, Evelyn did not sleep more than 5 hours any single night. Not because she couldn't sleep, but because the work was genuinely that demanding, and she had spent 6 years being someone who showed up fully to whatever she committed to, and she was not about to change that now, simply because the stakes had expanded by several orders of magnitude. She was at the office by 7 every morning. She left after 9 most nights. In between, she moved through the company the way she had once moved through the organizations she worked in during her 6 years away. Not from the top down, not from the executive floor outward, but from the ground level up. She walked the floors. She introduced herself to people whose names weren't in any board document. She sat in on operational meetings that no executive in her position was expected to attend, and said very little and listened to everything. The employees didn't know what to make of her at first. That was honest. She could see it in the way people adjusted when she came into a room, the slight straightening, the careful choosing of words, the particular performance that happens when a person in authority enters a space where people are used to not being watched. She recognized it because she had performed it herself many times in many rooms for many people who held power over her daily life. She worked actively to dismantle it, not by making speeches about open-door policies. She had sat through enough of those from managers who meant them for about 2 weeks before reverting to type. She dismantled it by showing up consistently, and without announcement in the places where the actual work happened. By asking specific questions that made clear she had actually read the documents. By remembering names after the first introduction and using them correctly the second time, which sounds small, but which people remember because it demonstrates the only thing that actually builds trust in organizations' attention. By the end of the second week, she had a clearer picture of the company's actual condition than anything the board reports had given her. And what she understood standing in the middle of it was this: the company was full of good people who had been operating without direction for long enough that they had started to lose faith in the idea that direction was coming. That was the real damage, not the budget cuts, not the restructured foundation, not even Marcus Webb's systematic reorientation of the technology division. Those were symptoms. The disease was the slow erosion of belief, the quiet daily accumulation of small signals that told people the organization they were part of had stopped caring about what it said, it cared about. Evelyn understood that disease intimately. She had watched it happen in every organization she'd worked in at the ground level. It always started the same way, not with a dramatic betrayal, with a meeting that ran 11 minutes and 40 seconds when it should have run 2 hours. She called a company-wide meeting at the end of her second week. All divisions, all locations dialed in remotely. She stood at the front of the main conference room on the 15th floor with Nathan beside her and Claire Huang at the back of the room with her tablet, and she looked at the people in front of her, the ones physically present and the faces on screens, and she said something that no Whitmore Holdings executive had said to this group in at least 2 years. She said, "I want to tell you what we're going to do differently, not in general terms, specifically." She talked for 40 minutes without notes. She told them about the healthcare technology subdivision restoration. She told them about the foundation restructuring. She told them about the rural education partnership. She told them about the 3 community programs that were being reactivated and the timeline for getting them operational. She talked about what the company's mission actually meant, not as a phrase in an annual report, but as a daily operating principle that was going to be visible in every budget decision, every strategic priority, every internal metric they tracked going forward. She did not talk about Marcus Webb. She did not talk about what had gone wrong or who was responsible. She talked about what was going to be different and why. When she finished, she opened the floor to questions. She answered every single one that was asked, including the hard ones, including the one from a woman in the Foundation's program team who said with careful but visible emotion, We were told 18 months ago that our work wasn't a priority anymore. How do we know that won't happen again? Evelyn looked at her directly. You don't know yet, she said. I can't give you certainty based on words. I can tell you what I'm committing to, and then you watch what I actually do. That's the only proof that matters, and I'll accept that standard. It's the right one. The room was very quiet after that. Then someone started clapping. Not enthusiastically, not performatively, just sincerely. And it moved through the room the way sincere things do without pressure, person by person. Nathan caught her eye across the room. His expression said, that was the right thing to say. She knew. 3 days after the company-wide meeting, Claire came into Evelyn's office at 8 in the morning and closed the door, which was the signal they had established for information that needed to be delivered privately before it became a larger situation. Webb had dinner last night with 2 board members, Claire said. Gerald Huang from the Investment Committee and Thomas Park from Strategic Development. 3 hours. Private room at Montague's. Evelyn looked up from the document she was reading. Who made the reservation? Webb's assistant, under a different name. They're being careful. Yes. What's the connection between Huang and Park outside the board? Claire had already prepared for that question. Huang's investment firm has a significant stake in a tech company that Webb's division has been funneling consulting contracts to for the past 18 months. Park is a personal friend of Huang's. They've known each other 20 years. Park was one of the loudest voices supporting the reallocation of the healthcare subdivision budget. Evelyn set down her pen. So Webb is building a coalition, she said. It looks that way. For what purpose the transfer documentation is signed, the legal authority is clear. The board can't override the transfer, Claire said, but they can make the operational environment very difficult. They can call for independent audits of your decisions. They can demand extended review periods for major strategic changes. They can create enough friction that the restructuring timeline slips months, maybe longer. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Who else was at the dinner? She asked. Just the 3 of them. And you found this out how? Claire paused. I have been your father's liaison to this board for a year. Some things come to me through channels I've cultivated carefully. I'd rather not be more specific than that. Fair enough. Evelyn stood up. Get me a meeting with Harriet today, this afternoon if she's available, and pull everything you have on the consulting contracts between Webb's division and Huang's portfolio company. Every invoice, every contract, every communication that's in the accessible record. That's going to be several hundred documents. Then start now. Claire nodded and left. Evelyn stood at the window for a moment. Outside, the city moved in its ordinary way, indifferent and continuous, and she thought about Marcus Webb having dinner in a private room and believed himself ahead of her. She thought about what it meant that his first instinct when threatened was to find allies rather than to adapt. She thought about what her father had said about him. He believes a company's primary responsibility is to its shareholders. He is skilled at making that argument in ways that sound like they serve everyone. I was not going to adapt. He was going to fight, and he was going to fight the way people fight when they are more committed to their position than to the organization they nominally serve. She had seen this too. Not at this scale, but in principle in every workplace where someone's personal interest had collided with the actual mission. She had watched managers in grocery stores quietly undermine inventory policies they didn't like. She had watched coordinators at community health clinics protect their programs by politicking rather than performing. The mechanics were identical, only the dollar amounts were different. Harriet came in at 2:30 with the expression of someone who already knew what the meeting was about. Webb, she said before she sat down, you heard. This morning, Gerald Huang called 3 of the independent board members before 9 o'clock. He was very friendly. He was very concerned about the pace of the proposed changes. He used the phrase fiduciary responsibility 4 times in one phone call, which is always the signal. Signal for what? For the fact that someone is preparing a challenge and is testing which way the room will lean. Harriet sat down. What are you going to do? Evelyn had been thinking about this since 8 in the morning, and the answer she had arrived at was not the obvious one, not the frontal confrontation or the defensive legal maneuver. Those would be fights on Webb's chosen terrain, and she had no interest in that. Nothing, she said. Harriet blinked. Nothing? Not yet. I'm going to let him make his moves. and I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Because here's what Webb doesn't understand about me, Harriet. He's trying to play a game I'm not playing. He's looking for a power struggle. That's the game he knows. And I have no interest in a power struggle, because I don't need to win one. The authority is already mine. What I'm building is something different. What are you building? Evelyn looked at her directly. Proof, she said. I'm building proof. I'm going to restore those programs. I'm going to show results. I'm going to demonstrate in the actual work that the direction I'm taking this company is the right one. And when I do that, when the people inside this organization and the people this organization is supposed to serve can see the difference, Webb's coalition is going to look like what it actually is. A group of people protecting their own interests against someone who is genuinely trying to do the right thing. Harriet was quiet for a long moment. That requires patience, she said. I have patience. It requires tolerating the friction while the proof accumulates. I know. And it requires that the proof actually accumulates, that the programs actually deliver. They will, Evelyn said, because I'm not going to run them from a boardroom. I'm going to be in them, the way I know how to be. Harriet looked at her for a long moment. Then she said something unexpected. She said, Your father told me once that the thing that worried him most about the company's future was not financial or competitive. It was that he might not find someone who understood that power and purpose have to move in the same direction, or one of them destroys the other. He said most powerful people he'd known had let power consume the purpose, and he was afraid. She paused. He's not afraid now. I want you to know that. Something moved in Evelyn's chest. She held it steady. Thank you, she said quietly. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at it out of habit and then went very still. Grant Callahan. Again. This was the fourth time in 2 weeks. She had declined every call. He had not left a voicemail on any of them, which told her something about what kind of call it was. Not something with a specific purpose, not a legal matter or a logistical question, but something more unformed and more desperate than that. Harriet noticed her expression. Someone you don't want to talk to, my ex-husband. Harriet raised an eyebrow. The divorce was 3 weeks ago. He's been calling. Do you know why? I can guess. Evelyn set the phone face down on the desk. His business situation has become difficult. There was a news piece 2 weeks ago, a development deal that fell apart, investors pulling back. And he knows about the Whitmore connection now. I don't know. Probably not the full extent of it. But enough has been in the business press in the past week that someone who moves in real estate circles and is paying attention would have connected some dots. Harriet's expression was precise and unsentimental. Don't take that call, she said. I wasn't planning to. And when he figures out how to reach you through other channels, because he will, don't let that conversation happen until you've decided exactly what you want from it, if anything. People in that position come with a version of themselves that's been carefully constructed to be sympathetic. Don't engage with the construction. Evelyn almost smiled. You speak from experience. 30 years in corporate governance, Harriet said. You see the construction a great many times. That evening, Evelyn went back to the hospital. Her father was having a better day. The color was slightly improved, his voice a little stronger, and he had been arguing with one of his nurses about whether he was allowed to have real coffee, which the nurse was dealing with the patient exhaustion of someone who had this argument multiple times per shift. Evelyn brought him real coffee. The nurse saw it and said, Miss Whitmore, with the tone of someone who had been betrayed by an ally. Just this once, Evelyn said. I'll take full responsibility. Her father accepted the coffee with the satisfaction of a man who had won something. They talked for 2 hours. She told him about the company-wide meeting, about Webb's dinner with Huang and Park, about her conversation with Harriet. She told it the way she told him things, completely without softening, and he listened the way he always listened, with total attention and the particular stillness of someone who processes quickly and speaks deliberately. Webb's going to push harder before he backs off, her father said. I know. He's going to find something to challenge, an audit trigger, a governance technicality, something that creates a public question mark about a decision you've made. I know, Evelyn said again. I'm documenting everything, every decision, every rationale, every communication. Claire is building the record. Her father nodded. Then he said, I want to tell you something I should have told you before you walked into that boardroom. She waited. Webb was my mistake, he said. It came out direct and unhedged, the way her father said things he had decided needed to be said without softening. I promoted him too quickly, and I gave him too much authority because he was effective in the short term, and I was not paying attention to the long term the way I should have been. I was sick, and I was distracted, and I told myself the systems would hold. They didn't hold. And I need to say that directly to you, because you are cleaning up something I created, and you deserve to know I understand that. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. You didn't create Webb, she said carefully. You created an environment where his instincts had room to move. That's different. That's generous. It's accurate. She leaned forward. And it doesn't matter right now. What matters is what comes next. Webb is a problem I can manage. What I can't manage is if you spend your energy on regret rather than on whatever you want to spend it on. Her father looked at her for a long time. When did you get this way? He said. What way? This. He searched for the word. Certain. You were always thoughtful, but this is different. This is someone who has decided what they believe and is not looking for permission to believe it. 6 years, she said simply. He nodded. He understood. He had always understood, even when it cost him something, that letting her go had given her exactly what he hoped it would. They sat together for a while in the quiet of the room, and outside the winter dark had come down fully over Hartford, and the monitors beeped softly, and Evelyn thought about how much she had missed this man, and how afraid she was of losing him, and how those two things were simply both true, simultaneously, and without resolution. Tell me about the letter, he said quietly. Which part? The part you haven't mentioned yet. She knew what he meant. There had been a paragraph near the end of the letter, the last full paragraph before his closing, that she had read 3 times and had not been able to talk about yet. Not with Nathan, not with anyone. He had written, "The one thing I most want you to know is this. Everything I built was built for you, not for the company, not for the legacy, for you. Because I believed from the time you were very young that you were capable of something I could not be capable of, holding great power without letting it cost you your humanity. I have watched powerful people my entire life. It costs them something. It cost me something. I see it when I look in the mirror. I do not see it when I look at you. Please protect that. Whatever else you do, protect that." She had not been able to say it out loud since she read it, because reading it had broken something open in her that she was still carefully, quietly putting back together. She said it now. She said the whole paragraph from memory quietly and without looking away from her father's face. When she finished, the room was very still. Her father's eyes were bright. He did not look away from her either. "I meant it," he said. "I know," she said. "All of it." "I know, Dad." He reached over and put his hand on hers, and they sat like that for a few minutes, which was enough. 2 weeks later, the audit request came. It arrived through official channels submitted by Gerald Huang on behalf of what the document described as a concerned group of board members requesting an independent review of the financial implications of Evelyn's proposed restructuring of the Foundation and Healthcare Technology subdivision. The document cited fiduciary responsibility twice. It requested a 60-day pause on implementation while the review was conducted. Evelyn read it at her desk at 7:30 in the morning with a cup of coffee and a very settled expression. Nathan called her at 7:45. "You saw it?" "Yes." "What do we do?" "We cooperate fully with the audit," Evelyn said. "We give them everything they ask for. We make the process as fast and clean as possible." A 60-day pause. "We don't pause," she said. "We cooperate with the audit and we continue the work. If they want to audit ongoing operations, they can audit ongoing operations. There is nothing in our governance structure that requires us to halt implementation while a voluntary audit is conducted, and Margaret Solano confirmed that 40 minutes ago when I called her." "You called Margaret at 7 in the morning." "I called her at 6:45. She was already at her desk." Evelyn paused. "Nathan, this is exactly what I told Harriet was coming. Webb needed a mechanism, and Huang gave it to him. This is the mechanism. It's designed to look like governance and function like obstruction. The answer to obstruction is not to stop. The answer is to be so transparent and so clearly correct that the obstruction becomes visible for what it is." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I trust you." "Good. Send Claire everything she needs to compile the audit package. I want it on their desks within a week. Complete, organized, and so thorough that reviewing it takes their 60 days just to read." She heard Nathan breathe. Then he said quietly, You know, when you first showed up at the house and I saw you with that canvas bag over your shoulder, looking like you'd been living in an apartment the size of a closet for 6 years. I thought I love my sister, but I don't know if she can do this. I don't know if she's... He stopped. You can say it. I didn't know if you were ready. And now, a pause. Now I think Webb is in a significant amount of trouble, and he doesn't fully understand it yet, she smiled. Actually smiled the real kind, the kind that arrives without warning. Get me the audit package, she said, and get some sleep at some point. You first. Good night, Nathan. It's 7:45 in the morning. I know, good night. She hung up. The audit package was delivered in 6 days. 412 pages of organized documentation covering every decision, every rationale, every projected impact with supporting data. Margaret Solano had reviewed every page. Harriet Voss had reviewed a substantial portion. It was by any professional standard comprehensive to the point of overwhelming. Gerald Huang's office acknowledged receipt. There was no response for 9 days. On the 10th day, Claire came into Evelyn's office with the expression she wore when information arrived that changed the shape of a situation. Thomas Park resigned from the board, she said. Evelyn looked up. Effective immediately. No public statement. His office said personal reasons. Evelyn set down her pen. What happened? The consulting contracts between Webb's division and Huang's portfolio company. The audit package included a complete record of every contract. 3 of those contracts were awarded without the standard competitive bidding process that Whitmore Holdings policy requires. Park was on the approval committee for 2 of them. Evelyn was very still. He didn't wait to see how it landed, she said. No, he got ahead of it. Which means he knows the audit is going to find what we found. Yes. And Webb, Claire's expression shifted. Webb sent you an email this morning. I flagged it. He wants to schedule a meeting. He calls it a conversation about the company's strategic alignment going forward. Evelyn picked up her coffee. She looked out the window for a moment. She thought about a conference room on the 14th floor 6 weeks ago, and papers on the floor, and a woman who signed her name slowly and deliberately and then walked out without looking back. Schedule it, she said. Thursday afternoon, 1 hour, my office. Claire wrote it down. How do you want to approach it? Directly, Evelyn said. The way I approach everything. She paused. And Claire, make sure the full audit record is on my desk before Thursday. Every contract, every approval, every name. Claire understood. Done, she said. On Wednesday evening, Grant Callahan called again, his 5th attempt. This time, Evelyn looked at the phone for a long moment before declining. She thought about what Harriet had said, that he would find a way to reach her through other channels, that he would arrive with a version of himself constructed to be sympathetic. She thought about the conference room, the papers on the floor, his mother's laugh, Chelsea Farrow's smile in the champagne blouse. She thought about something else too, something quieter and more honest, that Grant Callahan was a man who had made choices that made sense to him with the information he had, and that the information he had was the information she had deliberately kept from him. She had not lied, but she had omitted for 6 years a truth that would have changed everything. She had done it for entirely genuine reasons. She believed in those reasons completely, but she had done it. And the marriage that ended on the 14th floor was not entirely uncomplicated by that fact. She was not responsible for his choices. She was not responsible for the way he had treated her, the contempt, the diminishment, the public humiliation in that conference room. Those were his. But she had not been entirely transparent either, and she was honest enough with herself to hold both things at once. She put the phone down. She did not decline the call. She did not answer it. She just let it ring until it stopped, and then she went back to work because Thursday was coming and Marcus Webb was coming with it, and she needed to be ready. Not with anger, not with revenge, with the full and complete truth of who she was and what she was doing and why. That was always going to be enough. She had known it since she sat on the edge of a hospital bed in December and read a letter from her father and felt a door begin to move. She had known it since she walked into a boardroom and sat down at the head of a table and said her name out loud in a room full of people who were about to understand for the first time exactly who Evelyn Whitmore was. Thursday was coming, and she was ready. Thursday arrived the way important days always do, without ceremony, without announcement, with the same gray winter light and the same coffee going cold on the same desk. Evelyn was in the office at 6:45. She read through the audit documentation one final time, not because she needed to, but because she had always believed that preparation was a form of respect. Respect for the moment, for the stakes, for the people who would be affected by what happened in it. Claire arrived at 7:15 with a revised summary of the consulting contract irregularities and a single sentence that changed the shape of the morning entirely. "Webb called in sick," she said. Evelyn looked up. "His assistant called 20 minutes ago. He's requesting to reschedule to next week." Evelyn set down her pen. She looked at Claire steadily for a moment. Then she said, "Call his assistant back. Tell her the meeting stands. If Marcus Webb is well enough to send an email requesting a strategic alignment conversation, he is well enough to have it. I expect him here at 2 o'clock. Claire did not blink. "And if he doesn't come, then I'll know everything I need to know about where we stand." Evelyn picked her pen back up. "Make the call." Webb arrived at 1:58. He did not look sick. He looked like a man who had spent the previous 24 hours deciding what version of himself to bring into a room and had landed on something that was performing casual confidence with enormous effort underneath it. His suit was impeccable. His expression was composed. He came in with his hand extended and a smile that was technically perfect and said, "Evelyn, thank you for making time." She shook his hand. She did not correct the use of her first name, though they had never established that informality. She simply noted it, filed it, and gestured to the chair across from her desk. He sat. She sat. She let the silence last exactly 3 seconds longer than was comfortable. It was not a power move. It was an invitation. The kind of silence that tells a person, "I am not going to make this easy for you by filling it first. Whatever you came here to say, you are going to have to actually say it." Webb leaned forward. "I wanted to have this conversation privately," he said, "because I think there are things that are better said directly than through formal channels." "I agree," Evelyn said. "Go ahead." He talked for 4 minutes. He was skilled, she had known he would be, and the architecture of what he said was elegant in its way. He acknowledged that there had been decisions made in the past 18 months that in retrospect he understood she might see differently. He expressed his genuine commitment to the company's mission. He talked about the importance of experienced leadership during periods of transition. He suggested, with the careful phrasing of someone who has practiced the suggestion many times, that the pace of the proposed changes might benefit from a more measured implementation timeline that allowed the existing management team to adapt and align. He did not mention Thomas Park. He did not mention Gerald Huang. He did not mention the consulting contracts. When he finished, Evelyn opened the folder on her desk and placed it in front of him. He looked at it, then at her. 3 contracts, she said, awarded to Meridian Technology Partners between 14 and 22 months ago. Meridian is a portfolio company of Huang Capital, whose managing partner Gerald Huang sits on our board. All 3 contracts bypass the standard competitive bidding process required by company policy. The approval committee included 2 board members, one of whom has already resigned. The combined value of those contracts is $4.7 million. Webb's expression did not collapse. She gave him credit for that. It adjusted a small, involuntary tightening around the eyes a fraction of a second, where the performance slipped, and the calculation beneath it became briefly visible. "Those contracts went through proper channels," he said. His voice was steady. "They went through channels," Evelyn said. "Not proper ones. There's a distinction, and the audit documentation makes it very clearly. An independent review is already underway. We cooperated with it fully. All 412 pages of documentation were delivered to the audit committee 10 days ago." She paused. "Marcus, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you're a person who prefers directness, even when it's uncomfortable, and I respect that." He looked at her. "I'm not interested in a legal battle with you. I'm not interested in a public exposure of what those contracts represent unless you make that necessary. What I am interested in is the company working the way it's supposed to work for the people it's supposed to serve. That is my only interest." She leaned forward. "So here is what I'm offering you. You announce your resignation voluntarily for personal reasons effective in 30 days. During that 30 days, you brief your replacement fully and cooperate completely with the transition. In return, the audit findings related to the procurement irregularities are addressed internally, and the board review closes without escalation." The room was very quiet. Webb looked at the folder. He looked at her. He was doing the calculation. She could see him doing it, the same rapid internal accounting that people do when they realize the shape of the situation has changed completely and they are trying to find the exit that costs them least. "You'd let it close internally," he said slowly. "If the transition is clean," she said. "Yes." "Why?" It was a genuine question. She could tell because the performance had dropped out of it entirely, and what was left was just a man asking something he actually wanted to understand. "Because destroying you serves nothing I care about," she said. "The programs that were defunded are being restored regardless of what happens to you. The company's direction has changed regardless of what happens to you. All that remains is whether this ends cleanly or messily, and messy endings waste time and energy that belong to other things." Webb sat back. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the composed performance, not the calculation. Something more honest than either, something that might, in a different kind of man, in a different kind of moment, have been called recognition. 30 days, he said. 30 days. Another pause. "Who's the replacement?" "That's being determined," Evelyn said. "You'll be briefed." He stood up. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He started toward the door and then stopped and turned back, and she thought he was going to say something combative or defensive, the last move of someone who needed to feel like they hadn't completely lost. Instead he said, "For what it's worth, your father was right about you." She said nothing. He left. She sat at her desk for 60 seconds without moving. Then she picked up her phone and called Nathan. "Done," she said. He exhaled, long and audible. He agreed. He agreed. "Just like that. He's a smart man," she said. "Smart enough to recognize when the position is untenable. That's actually more than I expected." "What did he say at the end?" she told him. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Huh," he said. "Yeah," she said. "How do you feel?" She thought about it honestly. "Tired," she said, "and ready to do the actual work." The actual work, it turned out, was the most demanding and the most clarifying thing she had done since leaving Hartford 6 years earlier. The healthcare technology subdivision came back online in the first month with a new division lead, a woman named Dr. Sandra Reyes, who had spent 12 years developing diagnostic technology for rural health systems, and who, when Evelyn called her directly to offer the position, had been silent for so long that Evelyn thought the call had dropped. "Are you serious?" Dr. Reyes had said finally. "Completely." Another pause. "I've been watching what Whitmore's healthcare division was supposed to be doing for the past 4 years. I watched it get dismantled. I wrote a paper about it." "I read the paper," Evelyn said. "That's how I found you." Dr. Reyes came on board within 3 weeks and immediately began working with the speed of someone who had been waiting to run toward a problem for a very long time. The foundation restructuring was more complex. Evelyn spent 2 weeks in back-to-back meetings with the program teams, the community partners, the regional coordinators, the nonprofit organizations that had been handed programs without adequate resources when the foundation walked away. She approached those meetings the way she had always approached difficult conversations, by listening more than she spoke, by asking specific questions that told people she had actually read their reports, by treating the knowledge of people who worked in those communities as the primary expertise in the room, rather than as data to be translated by consultants. By the end of the second month, the foundation had 3 fully operational programs restored and 2 new initiatives in early development. The Rural Education Partnership was reactivated with a funding commitment 3 times the size of the original. The Community Health Access Program was up and running in 4 locations with 8 more in planning. Nathan ran the operational side with the focused energy of someone who had finally been given room to do what he was actually good at. He and Evelyn developed a working rhythm that was completely different from any executive partnership. Either of them had observed no hierarchy between them on the operational side, just division of function, constant communication, and the particular efficiency of 2 people who had known each other their whole lives and could therefore skip every layer of performance that organizational relationships usually require. And through all of it, every day, Evelyn went back to the hospital. Her father's condition continued to decline in the measured, careful way that terminal illness sometimes moves, not dramatically, not suddenly, but with the steady persistence of something that has made its decision and is following through. He had better days and harder days. On the better days, they talked about the company, about the programs, about specific decisions she was wrestling with. On the harder days, they sat together and sometimes said very little, and she read to him, or they watched something on his tablet, or she just held his hand while he slept and thought about everything he had given her, not the money, not the company, but the trust. The specific, unconditional trust of a parent who looked at his child and said, "I believe in who you're becoming. Go find out." 6 weeks after the Thursday meeting with Webb, his resignation was announced publicly. The press statement cited personal reasons and expressed gratitude for his years with the company. It was 2 paragraphs and said nothing that wasn't true, which was the result of careful collaboration between Margaret Solano and Webb's own attorney. The business press noticed. Several outlets ran pieces about the leadership transition at Whitmore Holdings. Most of them focused on the company-wide strategic shift that was already visible in the foundation's activity and the healthcare division's restored operation. A few of them mentioned Evelyn by name, which triggered a second wave of pieces from journalists who had done enough research to understand that the new face of Whitmore Holdings had spent the previous 6 years living and working in ordinary communities. One piece in a national business publication ran with the headline, "The Heiress Who Chose to Work at a Grocery Store." It was mostly accurate. It captured something real about what she had done and why, though it got some of the specific jobs wrong and described her apartment on Fernwood Street as a studio when it had been a 1-bedroom. Nathan sent her the link with the message, "You're famous. Are you okay?" She sent back, "I'm fine. How's the Tennessee Health Initiative?" He replied, "Ahead of schedule. Also, you should answer your phone sometimes." She knew what he meant. The calls from journalists had started coming in, from people who wanted to profile her, from organizations that wanted to partner with the foundation, from individuals she hadn't spoken to in years who suddenly had very warm memories of knowing her, and from Grant. He had stopped calling her cell phone after the 5th attempt. Then 2 weeks after the business press pieces ran, he sent an email. She saw it come in from a distance, not from his personal address, but from his work address, which was its own kind of signal about the formality he was trying to project. She read it once. He wrote that he had seen the articles. He wrote that he had tried to reach her several times. He wrote that he had been going through a difficult period professionally and personally. He wrote that he hoped she was well. He wrote in the third-to-last paragraph that he had been thinking a great deal about their marriage and about the way things had ended, and that he wanted her to know he regretted a great many things. The last paragraph asked if she would be willing to meet. She held the email in her mind for 2 days, not because she was uncertain. She was not uncertain. She held it because she believed that even decisions she was clear about deserved the full weight of her attention, and because she was trying to figure out which of the many true things she had to say was the right one to say. On the 3rd day, she wrote back. She wrote, "Grant, thank you for your message. I'm glad to know you're reflecting on things. I want to be direct with you, because I think that's what this moment calls for. A meeting wouldn't serve either of us. What happened between us is finished, and I mean that in the most complete sense, not with anger, not with bitterness, but as a simple fact. That chapter closed. I have a great deal of work in front of me, and I imagine you do too. I wish you well with yours." She signed it with her full name, Evelyn Whitmore, not the name she had used during the marriage, not a softened version, her name, the one she had grown up with and walked away from and come back to. She sent it and closed her laptop. 3 weeks after that, Alexander Whitmore died on a Tuesday morning in February at St. Catherine's Medical Center in Hartford, with Evelyn and Nathan on either side of him. It was not dramatic. That was the thing she remembered afterward, how undramatic it was, how quiet, how his breathing changed and then slowed and then stopped, and how the monitor's tone changed, and how the room that had been holding something vast and important simply held it differently now in the past tense in memory. Nathan held their father's hand for a long time after. Evelyn sat beside the bed and did not try to hurry herself through anything she was feeling, which was her practice with difficult things, and which was harder in this moment than it had ever been before. She thought about the letter, the 4 pages of angular handwriting. "I believe you are capable of something I could not be capable of, holding great power without letting it cost you your humanity." She thought about the first phone call, the one she had taken in her apartment on Fernwood Street with tea going cold in her cup and December light coming through the narrow gap between the buildings, the one that had started everything. She thought about the conference room on the 14th floor of Callahan Realty 6 weeks before that, papers on the floor, a woman bending to pick them up, a room full of people who had decided without knowing anything real about who they were looking at that she was not enough. She thought about her father's voice on better days, sharp and satisfied, saying, "Show me what you built," and her telling him program by program, decision by decision, number by number, and him listening the way he always listened, with complete attention and nodding in the way that meant, yes, that, exactly that. She thought about the last thing he said to her, 2 days before he died, on a better day, when he was lucid and present, and the afternoon light was doing something that made the hospital room feel almost warm. He had looked at her and said, out of a long silence, as if picking up the middle of a thought, "You know what I got wrong." "What?" she said. "I thought the hardest thing was building it. It wasn't." He looked toward the window. "The hardest thing was trusting someone else to carry it forward. Not because I doubted the person, because it meant accepting that what I built was bigger than me, that it had to be." She had taken his hand. "It is bigger than you," she said. "It always was. You just built it that way." He had squeezed her hand once firmly. Then he had closed his eyes and slept. That was 2 days ago. Now she sat in the quiet of the room and let the grief be what it was, without trying to manage it, without trying to compress it into something more functional or more contained. It was large and it was real and it was going to take time, and she was not afraid of things that took time. She had learned that in a small apartment on Fernwood Street 6 years ago, when she first understood that the most important things in life are not the ones that happen quickly. Nathan looked up eventually. His eyes were red and his face was open in the way that grief makes faces open, without defense, without the daily management of expression. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said that they did not already know. Then Nathan said very quietly, "What do we do now?" And Evelyn said, "We go to work." He almost smiled. It was the kind of almost smile that lives right at the edge of grief and carries something of both sides. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." The Whitmore Foundation's annual charity gala had been scheduled 6 months earlier, before Evelyn returned to Hartford, before the board meeting, before any of what had followed. It was the company's largest annual public event, 500 attendees, major donors, community partners, press, and it fell now 8 weeks after Alexander Whitmore's death in early April, with the particular timing of things that have been set in motion and arrive regardless of what has happened in between. There had been quiet discussion internally about whether to postpone. Evelyn decided against it. Her father had missed the last 2 galas due to his illness. She was not going to miss this one. She also made a change to the program. The gala had in previous years been organized primarily as a donor recognition event, a formal dinner with speeches from executives and board members about the company's philanthropic activities. Evelyn restructured it completely. She invited the people the foundation actually served: community partners, program participants, the rural healthcare workers whose clinics the Healthcare Technology Subdivision had begun supporting, teachers from schools in the Education Initiative, the woman from the Tennessee Health Program who had called Nathan's office in tears when she heard the partnership funding had been restored. She invited Gerald from the grocery store on Maple Avenue, not the one who used to need help with soup cans, but the store manager, a man named Phil Okafor, who had hired Evelyn on a Tuesday in October 7 years ago without asking too many questions, and who, had she later discovered, told his assistant manager that there was something about that particular applicant that suggested she was going to be useful. Phil had sent her a handwritten note when the business press pieces ran. She had called him immediately. "I always wondered," he said when she called, "wondered why someone like you was working a cash register in my store. Someone like me. Someone who, I don't know how to say this without it sounding strange. Someone who paid attention the way you did. To everything. All the time. Like you were learning something." "I was," she said. "Well," he said, "I'm glad my store was useful." She had laughed genuinely, the real kind. "Phil, will you come to our foundation gala in April?" He had come. He sat at a table with Dr. Sandra Reyes and a community health worker from rural Georgia named Darnell Washington, who had been using the Foundation's Restored Diagnostic Technology program for the past 6 weeks, and who had in that 6 weeks caught 3 cases of early-stage diabetes in a community that had not had reliable diagnostic access in years. Evelyn stood on the stage at the front of the room in early April in front of 500 people, and she looked at all of it. The donors, the board members, the press, Harriet Voss near the front with her composed and satisfied expression, Nathan at the side of the room with Claire and Margaret, and the assembled machinery of the organization. They were all running together, and she said what she actually believed. She did not read from prepared remarks. She had written prepared remarks, and she had read them twice, and then she had put them down, and decided to say the true thing directly, which was always more terrifying and always more effective. She said, "My father spent 30 years building something. He told me once that what he was building was bigger than him. I believe he was right, but I want to be honest with you tonight about what I think it's been missing." The room was very quiet. "This room," she said. "The people in this room who are not usually invited to rooms like this one, the community health worker who drove 4 hours to be here tonight, the store manager who gave someone a job without asking too many questions, the teachers and the clinicians and the program coordinators who have been doing the actual work in the actual communities this foundation is supposed to serve, they have not always been in this room, and they need to be. Not as an acknowledgement, not as a gesture, as a fundamental part of how we make every decision." She paused. "Whitmore Holdings is not going to be a company that does good work as a side effect of making money. It is going to be a company where doing good work and making money are the same project, because we are going to be focused every day on the things that ordinary people genuinely need. Not the things that look good in reports, the things that actually change lives." She looked at Darnell Washington's table. 3 cases of early-stage diabetes caught in 6 weeks in a community with no prior diagnostic access. That is what this company is going to be about. That is what we are measuring now. She stepped back from the podium. The applause was not the polite, formal kind that galas usually produce. It was the other kind, the kind that builds from different parts of a room at different speeds and arrives at something larger than the sum of its parts. Harriet Voss was on her feet. Nathan was on his feet. Phil Okafor was on his feet, clapping with the enthusiasm of a man who had no professional reason to be reserved about it. Evelyn stood at the front of the room and held all of it. The grief that was still present and would be present for a long time, the work that was underway and would require everything she had, the 500 people in front of her who represented both the distance she had traveled and the direction she was going, and she held it the way she had learned to hold large things, fully, without flinching, without looking away. After the gala, when the room had emptied to its last clusters of conversation and the event staff were clearing tables, a man approached her. She did not recognize him immediately. Then she did. Grant Callahan looked different from the last time she had seen him. Not older, exactly the same 6 weeks had passed for both of them, but diminished in some way that was not physical. The particular confidence that had always structured his face, the certainty that he was the most capable person in any room he entered, was quieter now, replaced by something more honest and considerably less comfortable. He had not been on the guest list. She made a note of that and then set it aside. "I came with a donor," he said immediately, which answered the question. I didn't plan this. I saw your name on the event materials and He stopped, started again. "I'm not here to ask you for anything. I need you to know that before anything else." She looked at him steadily. "Okay," she said. "I saw you up there." He gestured toward the stage. "I watched the whole speech." She waited. "I've been thinking about what I said to you. In that conference room, the way I treated you in that room and before it, and the things I said about you to my family and—" He stopped again. His jaw was tight. The discomfort was real, she could see that. It was not performance. "I had no idea who you were. Not in the Whitmore part, the company, I'm not talking about that. I had no idea who you actually were. I looked at you every day for 5 years and I made decisions about what I was seeing and I never—" He exhaled. "I never actually looked." The room was almost empty now. Nathan was at the far end watching without approaching, which was exactly right. Evelyn looked at Grant Callahan, and she felt the last residue of what had been between them with complete clarity. Not hatred, not love, not bitterness, not warmth. Something more final than any of those. The simple, settled recognition of a chapter that was entirely over. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry," he said. "I need you to know that I know what I did, not just in that room, all of it." She was quiet for a moment. "I believe you," she said. And she did. Not as absolution, not as the opening of anything, just as a true assessment of a man who had finally arrived at an honest accounting of himself. "I hope you find something real to build, Grant. I mean that." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face. Grief, maybe, or relief, or the particular emotion that has no clean name, the one that arrives when you finally understand the full weight of what you had and chose not to see. He nodded once. He walked away. She watched him go. Then she turned around, and Nathan was there, and she looked at her brother, her brilliant, patient, finely given-room brother, and she said, "Ready." "Always," he said. They walked out together, and behind them, the room held the last traces of an evening that had meant something, and ahead of them, the work was waiting, the real and demanding and meaningful work of building something that was larger than any one person, and was going to last longer than any of them, and was going to touch in real and specific ways the lives of people who would never know the name of the woman who had chosen deliberately and with full understanding of the cost to go find out who she was before she came back to use it. Evelyn Whitmore had been called worthless by a man who never took the time to look at her. She had picked his papers up off the floor with her bare hands and signed her name and walked out. And she had built from everything she had learned in the years he dismissed as ordinary, something so much larger than he was capable of imagining, that the gap between his understanding and the truth of her was not just a distance. It was an entire world, one that she had chosen, one that she had earned, one that she walked through every single day with the particular certainty of a person who knows in the deepest and most unshakable way exactly who they are. And that was something no divorce paper, no conference room, no man who looked at her and decided she was not enough could ever again take from her. Not now, not ever.